Well, it's bang on 7 o'clock now.
Well, it says according to 1859. We're recording.
And we're online now, are we?
Yes.
Yes.
So in terms of me being able to see the images on the screen, what happens about that? We need to share the screen. Okay.
How do we get rid of this? Do I just press? Got it. Okay. Oh. Given live and virtually from asterisk listed 18th century Lutheran church in Whitechapel, London. It's those zooming mute, the video up to you. But welcome to those present live in the church this evening. Lovely to see so many of you, and welcome also to those zooming at home in your pajamas, presumably, as the custom is. My name is Rick Jones. I'm the chair of the committee that looks after this church. It hasn't changed since it was built in 1762 and still has its old neck-high pews, its memorials in German, and its benefactor boards. The church still functions as a place of worship, but provides an income for its upkeep through book launches, weddings, film locations, and St. George's talks, like this on themes of local interest or German history and culture which St. George's represents. Now, our speaker this evening is an architectural historian, town planner, lecturer, campaigner, and an author 15 times of books on London mostly, 1980s London, subject of his last talk at St. George's, 1970s London, Spitalfields, the city, Bloomsbury, Islington, the parks and open spaces, markets generally, but also Smithfield in particular, the subject of this evening's talk. Our speaker has also tackled Brussels Art Nouveau and Cambridge, where he studied and read not architecture or fin de siècle Belgian art, but music, which as a harpsichordist and bassoonist he pursues today beside his living from the built environment. The German author, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, said, Musik ist flüssige Architektur und Architektur gefrorene Musik. Music is liquid architecture and architecture is frozen music. Therefore, there can be no one better qualified to talk about the flowing history of London's ancient slaughterhouse than this month's speaker. Will you welcome, please, Alec Forshaw.
Very good. Well, very good evening to you. Oh, yeah. Mr. Tech, the tech man cometh. No, go back to. Good. We can. We've still got an image on the screen. That's reassuring. Yeah, let's move to this way. Okay. Let's move on to. Oh, what have you done? That's no good. Yeah, sorry.
the way, everybody, questions will, if you have questions,
Still trying to get them.
we'll follow the talk.
Okay. Okay, Smithfield Market, an extraordinary historic institution in London. It's been a market associated with animals for a very long time. This is the perhaps familiar view of it as you come down St. John's Street, winding its way down from the Angel, and you come to the bottom of St. John's Street, and here is the very grand entrance, the Grand Avenue, it's known, which goes through the market to the other side. In the distance there, the buildings in the background of St. Bartholomew's Hospital. Well, let's start with the Romans, always a good place to start. The Romans pretty much did everything inside the walls that they built around their new town, Londinium. Outside the walls, they dumped their rubbish and they buried their dead, but they didn't really do anything more than that. And we have to move on really to the late Saxon and Norman period for that to change. Buildings still within the protection of the walls, but if we look on the top left corner of this map, and here's a blow-up of that, you can see there's a pond, a horse pool, and the word Smithfield. Smoothfield is what that means. And it was a flat bit of land. To the left was the valley of the River Fleet, which is a tributary of the Thames, running from Hampstead Heath, joining the Thames near Blackfriars. Still there, buried on. And it was on this smooth field that a livestock market started up. So rather than bringing the animals in through the city gates and into the congested streets, they had held it on flat land outside, all very sensible. There is, just going back, there is a record as early as the early 11th century. Fitzstephen, who was a chronicler, come from Normandy with William I. He described the market, a smooth field where every Friday there's a celebrated rendezvous of fine horses to be sold, and in another quarter are placed vendibles of the peasant, swine with their deep flanks, pigs and cows of an oxen of immense bulk. So this livestock market was a once a week affair, and as you'd expect for what was really quite a still small town. But that, of course, began to change. This is Tudor London, and you can see here that it's beginning to spread beyond those city walls. There are suburbs springing up, including where we are today, just outside the city walls in Aldgate. It's still quite a small town, but the livestock market was happening more frequently, 3 or 4 days a week even, to feed hungry and more wealthy mouths as well. Meat has always been expensive. London was prospering in Tudor times, and they wanted to eat more meat. The space of Smithfield has become more constrained by buildings around it. You can see on this blow-up of that same map. This is about 1550. And again, another enlargement of that. And this is a sort of early image of what that market might have been like. So animals kept in pens, sort of quite well organized, and then buyers coming round to choose their animals. The animals came from reasonably local, from they weren't coming huge journeys, and they would have been driven by drovers, or sometimes the farmers themselves. This is a view of the old church of St Mary's in Upper Street, Islington, which was a detached village up the hill, and a flock of sheep being driven through. Once they were bought, the animals were slaughtered in the Newgate slaughterhouses, again outside. These are buildings around the market, pretty much where Newgate Street is today. This looks quite a sort of pleasant beach. I think it would have been a completely disgusting and smelly, filthy place. I think slaughtering of animals was done in pretty crude fashion in those days, and nothing like the hygiene or regulations that exist today. It wasn't a market that had occupied this smooth field. As this map of Norman London shows, there is also a big square labelled St Bartholomew's. This is a religious institution, an Augustan priory that was established in 1123. So again, very, very early on after the Norman conquest. And here's an image of it, fronting onto the big space of Smithfield. And it was a huge complex with a massive, almost cathedral-like church. Now, this had been set up by a chap called Ra here. He was known as the jester, but in fact he was much more of a diplomat, or a cabinet minister, if you like, of his time. He was an aide to the court, and he also travelled on ambassador missions. And he went to Italy. He got malaria. He was on his deathbed, and he vowed that if he recovered, got back to England, he'd found a monastery, and he did. And he became a very pious man. He was wealthy, and he put his money into this magnificent church, some of which still survives with its superb Norman arches, one of the most atmospheric ecclesiastical buildings in London. Another image of it. But a key activity of the Augustinian monks was their healthcare. They essentially established a hospital alongside the church, and it really was London's first hospital. And here's an image of it, beds just lined against the wall. And they took everybody, children, women, men, all lined up. But they did tremendous work. They were very sort of outgoing and commercially minded as well. And another thing they set up next to the priory buildings was a cloth fair. So there was a lot of trade going on at that time between England and the continent, with cloth coming from Flanders and from Italy. The monks basically controlled this and made money out of it, of course. Some images, and this is the sort of stuff they were dealing in, fine cloth and linens. The open space, as well as having the meat market and sort of a cattle market, is an odd juxtaposition of these sort of activities, cheek by jowl, and that still carries on today. But the space was also used for other sort of forms of violence. It became a place of execution. So poor old William Wallace, Braveheart, he ended up being executed at Smithfield, and there's a memorial to him on the side of the hospital there, and the Scottish flag regularly appears there. This is an image sort of looking across, a sort of fantasy image, as if you were in a 16th century helicopter, balloon, looking across the open space of Smithfield. And there's in the background, the big square tower, St. Bartholomew's Priory Church. And then this is a map showing, this map is late 16th century. And what has happened in the meantime has been the dissolution of the monasteries by Henry VIII, ruthlessly sweeping away their assets, their property, their wealth. And Bartholomew Priory suffered very greatly. Most of the church was demolished, leaving just the chancel. That's what you see today, just a fragment of this magnificent church. And most of the monastic buildings were swept away. In front of the what was left of the monastic buildings, it became a place of execution, again, burning of the martyrs, in turn, Protestants, Catholics, depending who was in power in that turbulent period after Henry VIII. You can see images of it. What did survive of the activities of the priory was the hospital element. Now, Henry VIII sort of recognized this, and actually he insisted that the hospital carried on, and he put money into it. And this is the entrance to Bartholomew's Hospital, and that's a statue of Henry VIII over the entrance. So he's much remembered. Now, the big event in the 17th century, of course, was the Great Fire of London, which had a devastating impact on most of the city, but actually not Smithfield. Smithfield was protected by the city walls. The flames couldn't leap over them northwards. And so you can see here, this map, just how lucky Smithfield was. In fact, that luck was commemorated by this funny little statue, the fat boy, who is, well, he is a fat little boy. He is a symbol of the avarice and gluttony that allegedly caused the fire to happen. There he stands. I think he's called the little boy now, because you can't call people fat anymore. So it's been renamed. But a lot of pre-fire buildings survived in the Smithfield area and do still survive. The Holy Sepulchre, St. Sepulchre's Church on Newgate survives, pre-fire building. The gateway to the church of St. Bartholomew's, a Tudor building, that's still there. And these amazing old houses in Clough Fair with their jetted timber fronts, pre-fire buildings. And a lot more did survive until the 20th century, when this is Clough Fair, with intact really with medieval buildings, and further ones here, sadly lost in the 20th century. Through now to this is post-fire London, the city rebuilt, and in the 18th century, because London became incredibly prosperous, an empire was building up, and London began to expand in all directions. And so did the meat market, the livestock market, spreading into the surrounding streets as well as the big central open space. And there are lots and lots of images of it. And you can see here, if we sort of pan out now, these images of Smithfield is no longer on the edge of London. It's right in the middle of London, and the market has become huge. London is getting up towards 1 million people. All these suburbs of the West End have been built, spreading south of the river as well. And even though the Euston Road, Pentonville Road, has been built as a bypass. It was known as the New Road, built in the 1750s, so that these animals didn't have to tramp through the smart bits of Mayfair and whatever, Fitzrovia. It was becoming intolerable. This shows animals coming through some of the quite smart new residential districts that are being built up. This is Holloway Road, up towards Archway. Again, this is Upper Street, with this rebuilt church, St Mary's, now a very smart part of town. And it really wasn't very nice for these new residents to have a whole load of animals tramping past with all the muck that comes with them. The animals too now are coming from much greater distances, coming from all over Britain. There were cattle coming from Wales, from Scotland, and even reports of coming from the Isle of Skye, where they had to swim the first bit across to get to the mainland. Geese being driven up from Norfolk, 70, 80 miles. Extraordinary journeys, terrible sort of hardship for the animals as well, who would often arrive in a pretty terrible state to be sold. Again, some more images of it. A move started really to a movement in the press and whatever the Smithfield Market should itself move. Reports of accidents and animals getting out of control, reports of pigs eating babies and all this sort of nonsense. But a big campaign was building up. The other thing that was causing a problem in the Smithfield is that the rather sedate cloth fair, with its fine linens, had morphed into a different sort of fun fair. Those who've read or know Ben Jonson's play, Bartholomew Fair, it had become a place of bawdiness, rowdiness, drunkenness, prostitution, all sorts. This was becoming intolerable to genteel society. Images here of it, sort of Hogarthian images of the sort of squalor and satirists, selling a wife at Smithfield Market. It was a place of crime, all sorts of stuff going on. The Valley of the Fleet, bordering the Smithfield to its west, had also become, well, the river had become an open sewer. So this is pre-Thames water, but there it is. And terrible sort of hovels surrounding it, a den of crime. This is the area where Oliver Twist is set, Fagin's Den, etc. And see image. This is somebody, a body being shoved down a hatch into the river, I think. The move to get rid of Smithfield Market really gathered pace in the early 19th century. Dickens became a great campaigner for this. In Oliver Twist, he writes about Smithfield being a shameful place, all asmear with filth, fat, blood, and foam. So he wasn't keen on the place. The city corporation, however, who ran the market, they were very reluctant to close it down because of all the tolls that they took. They made a lot of money out of it. So it actually took an act of parliament to force the city to close it. It did close in 1855. The city were very keen to still get their tolls, so they bought land north of King's Cross. Now this image shows on the left a sort of winding lane, Maiden Lane, that's York Way, which is the old winding track from London up to Highgate. But on the right-hand side, there's a new dead straight road the road to Highgate, it's called, that's Caledonian Road, 1840s. And the city bought up all the land in between, which had been market gardens and been a cricket pitch at Copenhagen House. They bought it all up, and they built a new livestock market on a very, very grand scale. Much more land than had been at the old Smithfield. And it had all mod cons. It had this great clock tower, which was a landmark for the drovers approaching London. They know where to go to this new place. Around the edges, there were great railings and quite grand buildings, sort of hotels and hostels for the drovers to stay in and the business people to stay in. There were banks and there were slaughterhouses too. There's an aerial sort of image of it. Colossal space. Quite nearby in Islington, an agricultural hall was built in the early 1860s, a place to have livestock shows. This is where the prize animals were displayed, and you got your prizes and rosettes, whatever. What was to change everything was the railway, the coming of the railways. Now, when it came to London, it was a rather fragmented process. Each railway company built their own terminal. But completed in 1863 was a new line to link up all the terminals. It's called the Metropolitan Line. It links up Paddington, Euston, St Pancras, King's Cross, and then down to Liverpool Street. And it goes through, or went through, the old Smithfield area. Now, when the market had closed, the land had just been left empty. It was a big open space, and the city hadn't really decided what to do with it. But when the railway was planned, there was a sort of a moment of great enlightenment. They realized that it no longer made sense to drive all these animals hundreds of miles and then kill these emaciated. Much better to kill the animals in the provinces in a good state and bring the carcasses quickly by railway to London. So what London needed was a dead meat market, not a livestock market. And in fact, the new livestock market they had built up on this huge site in Islington was really a waste of time. So they got their timing wrong a bit there. Here's the construction of the Metropolitan Line coming through the Smithfield area. There's St Paul's in the background. Here's some images of it. Wasn't an easy task building it next to the River Fleet. There were all sorts of problems there. But anyway, eventually it was finished. And it's still there, tube trains and Thameslink and all that stuff going through it. Wonderful bit of engineering. And the city decided to build a new dead meat market on top of that railway in its cutting. And they set their architect onto it, the city architect, Horace Jones, great architect. His last project, of course, was Tower Bridge, but he built all the sort of city's municipal buildings, and here his initial sort of grand plans and designs, which seduced his masters. There was plenty of offer. The city was extremely wealthy, and the new building opened in 1868, and there's an image of it. And extensions were built to it very quickly, still with Horace Jones, running right down to Farringdon Road. Colossal site, 10 acres, big site, amazing buildings. And what was brilliant about it was the sort of segregation, so that the carcasses came in by rail below ground, the big sidings there. The carcasses were taken up into the market. They were all cut up into the bits that the butchers wanted. And then the butchers would take the meat out back to their shops and whatever in their carts, which was street level. So it all worked very, very well. Brilliant natural ventilation. Horace Jones was a master of cast iron and ventilation. He knew how to deal with all that. And very florid architecture as well. It was a real pride in what they did. And this is the completed complex, which sort of shows the railways running underneath the market. Smithfield was part of a lot of improvements that the Victorians did to the city. This is a map in red, shows all the bits that the Victorians did. So on the bottom left, you've got the embankment, of course, Queen Victoria Street. But this concentration on the top left is all the works around Smithfield. And they really rebuilt the area completely. Home Viaduct is all part of that project. Sort of a massive scheme. Spanning the Fleet Valley, so you hardly notice it today when you cross it. And of course, the river itself was put into a sewer, so it's out of sight. And this is an image of the hydraulic lifts, which carried the steam-driven lifts that carried the meat up from the basement sidings up into the market. And some amazing scenes here of all the horses and carriages with the butchers' vans. And the next big innovation was refrigeration. That really changed the world. You could bring carcasses from New Zealand and Argentina and all these incredible places. Docks, and then they were stored in cold stores which surrounded the market. Here's one of them. Very, very grand buildings, and quite a few of these still survive. Amazing structures. And this sort of was a huge sort of boost to Smithfield Market. London was still growing in all directions. By 1900, it was up to 5 million people. And Market was going hammer and tongs. This is a poignant image taken, a photograph taken in July 1939. Now, on the outbreak of war, so many people worked in the market that the government decided it should be closed down because it was such a concentration. It was too dangerous for bombing. So it was closed, and of course, not long there was meat rationing as well. So, however, by towards the end of the war, 1944 or 43, whatever, people started to sort of creep back, and there's black market stuff going on. And this had absolutely tragic consequences. In March 1945, so very soon, very near the end of the war, the last V2 rocket to hit London hit Smithfield. And here are two images of it. It hit near the junction of Farringdon Road and Charterhouse Street. It killed 179 people, many of whom were women who had come to buy scraps of meat and whatever. Absolutely shocking incident. After the war, the city rebuilt the damage. They built a new junction that's known as Hart's Corner. They didn't try and copy the Victorian style. They did something of their time, but in decent materials. They used Portland stone and good quality brick. Very functional building. And the next tragedy was the poultry market. Again, Horace Jones building was burnt out in 1958. Fire broke out below ground and roasted all the chickens, but killed also 4 firemen who were caught in the basement. What to do with it? Well, this is what they did with it. A new building finished in 1962. T.P. Bennett, the architect, Amazing domed roof. It was the largest span dome in the world when it was finished, 1962. And here's an image of it. So in the foreground, you've got the market buildings fronting onto Farringdon Road. And there on the top left, you've got the dome of the new poultry market. And it's left, the big building with the gable, that's one of the cold store buildings on Charterhouse Street. Within the market, the handling of the meat was still really Victorian. Everything carried by hand, old carts. There was strict demarcation of labour. So there were particular men who got the carcasses in to be hung up on their hooks in hernia making work. And then there were cutters who did their stuff. And then there were porters who took it out to the vans, bummeries who were self-employed ones. Very strict demarcation, very strong unionization. And of course, all men. Hardly any women worked in the market. It was an extraordinary place. And this carried on right through really to the 1990s. But one big change was to really affect the market was the closures of railway lines by Beeching in the 1960s. Enormous change in that the carcass meat started to arrive by lorry rather than railway. And it started getting very bad congestion at street level. So the delivery lorries would all get tangled up with the butcher's vans. And a lot of chaos, pollution, complaints from all sorts of people. The Greater London Council in 1969 decided something should be done about it. Here we are, the Greater London Plan, and in that they had a proposal to move all the wholesale markets out of the centre of London. So the first to go was Covent Garden. That moved from Covent Garden to Nine Elms. Spitalfields Fruit and Veg Market moved out to Stratford. There's an image of it. The Billingsgate Fish Market, which also in the city by the river, that moved to Docklands, Canary Wharf. And Smithfield was intended to be moved as well. This is where my sort of engagement starts as a baby town planner in Islington in 1975. The two boroughs sort of involved in the Smithfield area, the Corporation of London, of course, who owned the market, but just the other side of Charterhouse Street is the borough of Islington. And actually nearly all the men who worked in Smithfield lived in Islington. So we were all terrified about the market closing. It would cause huge distress. And of course, the city didn't want the market to close either. So rather oddly, given their political differences, they worked together to come up with a convincing reason and a plan as to why the market should stay where it was. It wasn't just the market as well. A huge number of the buildings in the side streets were involved in meat processing. This is Cowcross Street, so you can see the Danish Bacon Company. They were curing bacon here. There are all sorts of firms making sausages or even making airline meals and all sorts of things. This map shows all these dots are firms directly associated with the meat market. The pubs, they all opened at funny hours because it's a nighttime market, of course. So they're all open, well, you can hear from 6:30 and 9 in the morning. And there were still some extraordinary industries, really going back to the livestock, who were making things, or buttons made out of bone and horn. Even somebody making tennis racket strings out of gut. But we came up with this plan. We won the day. The market stayed. But in the 1980s, things began to change. The amount of meat coming through the market radically dwindled because of supermarkets. Supermarkets sort of changed the world, changed the retail shopping world of food. They had their own suppliers. They didn't buy their stuff from Smithfield Market. So premises started to close. The area started to empty out. Here's some of the Danish bacon curing buildings being demolished. So we had to revise the plan, what to do. The market was going to shrink. The city corporation had all sorts of challenges because of the EU and new hygiene regulations. Eventually, they decided to spend about £20 million upgrading the market, but they closed half of the market down. All the buildings at the western end, they closed down. I was so vexed by all this that so I started writing books about the area, which I've got some copies of at the back. But here we see some of the improvements. They had to put new canopies on so that the lorries could dock and no exposure of anything to the air. So quite radical improvements. New stainless steel floors were put in to cover up all the old wooden floorboards and whatever. That was all good for the eastern bit of the market, but the western part of the market was emptied out and left to rot. And here it is, rotting away. Pictures taken 20 years or so ago now. All very, very sad, and we all were wondering what on earth was going to happen. You can see here, this is the view from Holborn Viaduct across to the western market buildings. And the city came up with a very grand plan indeed to knock it all down and put up office blocks. And so there was a big campaign against that. The Victorian Society, Save Britain's Heritage. I was heavily involved in a couple of public inquiries, and fortunately we won. We persuaded planning inspector and the Secretary of State, who was Eric Pickles, that this architecture was worth saving. And we see what it was like, an amazing Victorian architecture. We came up with an alternative plan that we thought, we'd seen what had happened to Borough Market with all this sort of foodie stuff. We thought maybe you could do something similar in these buildings, although we had no money or whatever to do that. Other thing that had happened in the meantime, the Thameslink project had been built, reconnecting the Snow Hill Tunnel line. All the sidings underneath the market were still there, derelict. But this new line was driven through Thameslink 2000, it was called. I don't think it was finished quite in 2000, but it's still there. We will use it, I'm sure. And it connects through Brighton through to Cambridge and whatever, Bedford. And then the new lines were put back, and Farringdon Station became a Thameslink station. Well, what to do with the market buildings? Well, the Farringdon Station and Thameslink, I think, gave some people in the city a fresh idea, and inspired, triggered by dissatisfaction from the new director of the Museum of London, who was finding that the premises constrained. It's on quite a stranded site, just south of the Barbican. Nothing like enough space for everything they've got. I think only 1 in 20 things they've got room to display, and the rest is all in storage warehouses all over the place. So the idea was, let's move the Museum of London to those redundant market buildings. And some visions were presented. London Museum of London, an image of it from the sky. And this is the the site that it uh, uh, is intended to occupy. So the poultry market, the 1960s poultry market, and the Victorian buildings to their left. Again, images that were presented. And the decision was taken to go ahead with it. And again, here we can see more images. The fantastic thing about it is this enormous underground space. Museums don't like a lot of daylight, so they're always trying to keep daylight out. So this is perfect. So it's going to be a bit like an iceberg, so very little above ground, it's all below. And all sorts of exciting potential here. You'll be able to see the trains going past and whatever. So again, all these images. Well, that all seemed very good, and I did a bit of an update of the book. And Smithfield, this is back in pre-pandemic. Everything seemed to be going very well. Buildings had been empty. Pubs like this, the Rising Sun, reopened. Lots of the unused industrial buildings were repurposed for designer studios and fancy restaurants, all sorts of things, and also residents actually. Had a fantastic new lease of life, new bars opening up, cloth fair, wonderful new housing built there, new residents, a lot of investment in the area. Bart's Hospital went through a scare. The Tomlinson report, produced in 1993, recommended the closure of St Bartholomew's Hospital, and there was an incredible campaign, Save Barts, which was successful. 1995, the axe was withdrawn, and Bart's kept, and there it is today. Amazing place. It's wonderful, and a lot of investment in it. There's the Great Hall. There's a campaign at the moment to restore that. It's got a lovely little museum. And of course, the church, St Bartholomew the Great, is still there. It's just last year had its 900th birthday. And there's Ra here having a good rest. And there's the image of the operating meat market. The butcher's company are just round the corner. Everything seemed to be perfect until this. Well, isn't it moving? What's happened here? There we are. Sorry, it's good. Move back. Plan to move the meat market. So the city got with an idea really based on Billingsgate and the new Spitalfields markets, which occupy enormous sites with sort of sheds on. Here's Billingsgate, right next door to Canary Wharf. 30 acres of land, it must be worth billions. And similarly, at Stratford, the Spitalfields fruit and veg market, 40 acres of land. So the proposal is to move all three markets to a new site. And that decision has now been taken and is going to happen in 2029, 2030. The meat market is carrying on in the meantime. It has shrunk. I mean, it's nothing like it was even back in the 1980s. Then there were 4,000 people working in the market. Today there are 400, so it's tiny. Everything is mechanized. All those old carts have gone. Everything's handled with forklift trucks, etc. So it's quite sort of sanitized. Most of the buyers are central London caterers, hoteliers, specialist butchers. It's Barking, that's where it's going. A long way away from central London. And I say it makes a lot of sense, probably from the city's point of view, to move Billingsgate and Spitalfields, and they'll be able to sell the land. But whether it makes any sense to move Smithfield, I doubt somehow. I'm not sure that many of the central London buyers are going to want to flog out to Barking and back again to get their meat. So slightly gloomy about that. So the future of Smithfield as a wholesale meat market is very much under threat. Just as a sort of a bit of a side to some of those other things, the Smithfield show, because that closed down 20 years ago. It had moved from the agricultural hall to Earl's Court, which was a bigger place. But that is now finished. And of course, the old cattle market at the Caledonian Road north of King's Cross. That wasn't a livestock market for very long because of the railways. It became a peddler's market in the 20th century. People, a bric-a-brac, really. And here you see some images of it. In the background is one of the big hotel hostels for the drovers. And then that closed after the war, and the area became a big empty site, nothing going on. Housing was built on part of it, and the rest became a park. But the clock tower survives, and these amazing railings. Now the railings used to have these incredible bulls and rams' heads in them, and they were all nicked, except for one, which is in the Museum of London. There it is, incredible thing. I always thought it'd be rather nice to get replicas made of, well, perhaps not cast iron, and to put them back. In the meantime, work proceeds apace on restoring the derelict market buildings for the Museum of London. And there's a lot going on, terrific progress. There are two architects involved. The main architect is Stanton Williams, who've done a lot of big arts projects across the country. And then a specialist conservation architect, much more local to here, and Julian Harrop, who's a wonderful, wonderful man and doing all the right things of keeping original fabric. You see some images. Uncovered some interesting things. These are the so-called cocoa rooms, which were put into the market as a sort of canteen for the workers, where no alcohol was served, but only cocoa. And these have been uncovered and are going to be restored. You'll be able to buy cocoa again there. And they're doing a fantastic job, I think, cleaning everything up. Lots of bits and pieces from the old market building, which they're great pains to keep and put back in the building. And here's the copper dome of the two big domes. This is the small Victorian one, recently finished, and here the dome to the 1960s building restored as well. So huge progress. And of course, the other thing that's happened is Crossrail. So the new Farringdon Crossrail station, interchange with Thameslink. It's the best connected place in London really now. The station is so long, it's got two entrances, one at Farringdon Road and the other side of the market, near the Barbican. So you need to get off at the right end. So there we are. It's an ongoing story. I'm sort of hoping that, as has sort of happened with Borough Market, that there will still be a sort of retail food in Smithfield, and that would go, I think, quite well with the Museum of London and all the visitors that will attract. I think it would be a shame if it just became boutique shops, a bit like Leaden ads. So I think it would be good if it retained some sort of earthiness to it. Smithfield has an extraordinary character, really unique to this day, and it would be a shame, I think, if that is lost. So a real challenge. Anyway, I'll finish on that note, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Alec. That was a most entertaining and interesting talk. We have one or two questions.
Yeah, I'll repeat the questions that have come from remote participants, of whom there are 50. Peter Jones has asked, how many employees are working in the market today? And you answered that question?
About 400.
And when was it 10 times that number?
Certainly in the 70s and 80s, it was that number. There was then a huge process in modernizing the market with all those physical changes, but also negotiations with the unions to sort of modernize the working practices. Although all that stuff that was carried by hand stopped. So yeah, massive reduction. There are also actually some women who work in the market now too, which is rather good.
And the other question that came from there, also from Peter Jones, was where can he buy this new edition of your book?
Nowhere. It's out of print. It's out of print, I'm afraid. I've got a few copies at the back, but it is out of print. I will do another version of it. Probably in 2 or 3 years' time, when the museum opens. And the museum is going to open, I think, in 2028. That and the coinciding with the end of the meat market will be quite a good time to celebrate or record, anyway.
If Peter Jones wants to reserve a copy, we can keep one here.
You can, yes. You could
ask him that.
Yeah, if he wants to buy one. 15 quid.
Jeff.
Yeah, there's a lot of space underneath, isn't there?
Huge
I mean,
space.
I've been down the ramp.
Yeah.
What's the car?
Yes.
That could be used as well.
Oh yeah. There's a massive. There's 10 acres of land. It's huge. There's a potential for all sorts of stuff. I mean, you could below ground, you could have all sorts of activities, sports halls,
You know that in Bartholomew, they want to move all these markets.
Yes, they've bought this quite big site. It's about 40 acres. It cost them 100 million to buy it. And it's on the riverside. Barking Reach is, yeah. So there's a lot of space there. I'm sure it'll be good for barking. I mean, it's interesting that quite a lot of the people who work in the market now, they don't live in Islington anymore. They live out that way. They live Watford, sort of Essex, and they're quite keen from their point of view not to have to drive in because they drive and they've got the congestion charge and all this stuff they hate. So they're going to be quite happy, but they're sort of shop owners, people who run the business, are not so happy because everything's by road.
So I wanted to just repeat, in case Peter Johnson hadn't heard it, if you'd like us to reserve a copy of Alec's book for you, he's got a couple of copies here now to sell, so let us know. There's a comment here from Jerry. He says, Billingsgate Market is actually used for the 3 or 4 per week regular joint agency checks by the DVLA and Customs and Excise of heavy goods vehicles, because there is sufficient space for parked lorries. And coaches near to central London. The vehicles to be checked are flagged down by police on motorbikes in Commercial Road and turned back along Whitechapel and Mile End Road. Concerns where this could go.
Yeah, well, I'm sure if I'm in Billingsgate, I remember when it moved in 1983. So I was writing a book about all London's markets at that time. And we went to the last day of Billingsgate, which is an extraordinary occasion.
The smell didn't disappear for about 20 years.
No, it didn't. No. And it was the most amazing occasion. And because in 1983, Docklands was still a huge derelict area. Canary Wharf and all that stuff hadn't started at all. And they got this big site and they built these sheds. And it was extraordinary other world there. And how that's changed now, they're overshadowed by these towers. And it's a silly location for them now. So the city, they sell or develop that site for I don't know, housing, luxury flats, whatever it is.
There
There won't be
lorry
testing there, I don't think.
So
So they'll have to go to Barking as well.
Any other questions? Yes, yes.
Why the London, the Museum of London closed so early? It only can move.
Well, that's a good question. And
they
they say it's because they're doing a lot of curatorial work. They're sort of recataloguing everything. And I think it's a bit of a lame excuse because they're going to have been closed for 5 or 6 years. Well, they're already closed. Yeah. I don't know why. It's bewildering.
He wants to demolish the site.
Oh, they do. Yes, no, that's going to planning committee tomorrow. So yeah. I mean, the city say they need to redevelop the old museum and Bastion House next to it in order to make money to pay for the new museum, I suppose.
2026 is the date on the Museum of London website.
They need to update that. Yeah.
So who's paying for the Museum of London?
Partly the city, there's a big lottery element going into it. And I think Greater London Council are putting something in as well. Because it is a museum for London. It's not just a city museum. It's, so I think it's multiply funded.
It's rebranded now as well.
Sorry?
It's rebranded, it's not the Museum of London anymore.
No, London Museum, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So the idea that the meat market moved out in order the museum to move in is incorrect.
That is incorrect. That is incorrect.
Your hope that they would.
I think they could have.
Side by side.
Yes, I think they could. Particularly as the meat market is nighttime.
Yeah.
The museum's not going to be open at night, I doubt. So I don't think. I think the character of the area is so unusual that it would have been to the benefit of the museum to have that sort of activity close to it. But there we are. We'll see how it goes. What I hope is that the market building retains some sort of earthiness and roughness to it.
Yeah.
Doesn't come too sanitized. It's the sort of death of everywhere. Yes.
Yeah.
There was an interesting, actually, when the livestock market closed in 1855, there was an amazing article in the Times about what vegetarians are going to do. What's incredible. So vegetarianism is not a new issue.
Good. Well, that's a good note on which to end, I think. Vegetarianism for the future. Thank you all very much for coming. Now, if you'd like to join us at the back, there's a glass of wine waiting and some cake, but only for those who come live, of course. The Zoom people will have to furnish themselves with their own refreshments. Thank you once again, Alec, very much for that wonderful talk.
Good. Thank you. Great.
Cool. So, and copies of Alec's
There are some
books, not just the Smithfield book, but others that.
Would you like to draw attention to next month's talk?
Oh, thank you. Yes, if we're still online. Of course, every third Tuesday through the year, etc. August, but we have a St. George's talk. And the next one in a month's time is on Berlin, the past and future of the city of Berlin, given by our good friend Frank Pattison, who's a regular speaker here and always gives extremely entertaining and beautifully presented talks. So do please come to that, and but of course online and you present here too. So thank you all again very much, and do join us at the back.